Hello everyone and good evening. My name's Don Arleth and coming to you live from Warsaw, you're watching World News Tonight. An unprecedented brazen incident is what Estonia is calling the violation of its airspace on Friday by Russian fighter jets. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Another hybrid attack from Berlin to Dublin. Cyber attack on several European airports creates nightmare for passengers. The second ratings agency this month reduces outlook on Poland's debt from stable to negative. And the walls of Wrocław transform into spectacular displays in Kino Mural 2025. Polish and NATO fighter jets were scrambled once again during a massive attack on Ukraine overnight into Saturday. This comes just after 3 Russian MiG-31s were intercepted by Allied aircraft over Estonia on Friday, keeping the alliance on its toes. Article 4 consultations under NATO have been called for the second time now since Russia violated Polish airspace with a wave of drones, a few of which were shot down earlier this month. Anastasia Yanchenko has the details of this latest Russian provocation.
Another week, another Russian airspace violation, this time in Estonia.
3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets entered the Estonian skies without permission and remained there for a total of 12 minutes.
According to a map released by the Estonian Defense Ministry, the violation occurred over the Gulf of Finland. 3 Russian military aircraft flew parallel to the Estonian border from east to west, entering Estonian airspace by less than 10 kilometers. Italy, Finland and Sweden scrambled jets under NATO's mission to bolster its eastern flank. In response to Russian provocations, Estonia also decided to request NATO Article 4 consultations. This is the second time this month that a NATO member has requested Article 4. Poland did so on September 10th after Russian drones entered its airspace.
NATO is acting exactly as agreed. There was no direct threat to Estonia in a military sense, but we absolutely do not accept that Russia is violating Estonian and NATO airspace.
Like always, Russia denies violating Estonian airspace.
3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets made a scheduled flight from Karelia to an airfield in the Kaliningrad region. The flight was conducted in strict accordance with the international rules for the use of airspace without violating the borders of foreign states.
US President Donald Trump expressed his dissatisfaction with Russia's bold move.
I don't love it. I don't like when that happens. It could be big trouble.
Experts fear that it could take a long time, especially for the US, to start taking action against Russia.
I guess it's the nature of humans to delay and delay and delay, because life's pretty good right now for most of the world, and so nobody wants to go to war.
In response to the threat of repeated Russian incursions into EU territory, the European Commission launched the Drone Wall initiative, a joint effort to build a network of surveillance and defense systems along the EU's eastern borders to protect European airspace.
European NATO allies on the flank should publish a joint warning to Russia to shoot down the next object that violates airspace. There should be no more polite escorts back home.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on Poland for collaborative efforts to protect both countries from enemy's drones.
We have air defense systems. We shoot down everything flying toward us and toward Poland. And likewise, Poland shoots down with its aircraft everything flying toward them and toward us.
Next week, EU defense ministers will discuss plans for constructing the EU drone wall, with Ukraine expected to participate. Anastasia Yanchenko, TVP World.
Russia launched a night of terror on Ukraine as Vladimir Putin seems to be emboldened by the weak U.S. response to his recent provocations against NATO. Overnight into Saturday, the aggressor launched 40 missiles, both cruise and ballistic, and around 580 drones of various types against Ukrainians as they slept. The Ukrainians themselves are not taking this lying down, however, and have attacked more key Russian oil refineries. Our correspondent, Oz Chatterjee, is in Kyiv and joins us now. Good evening, Oz. So, can you please summarize the exchange of blows that has taken place over the last day?
2 people have been killed here in Ukraine and 36 others injured in Russia's massive overnight strikes against the country coming in the early hours of Saturday morning. Ukrainian authorities, as you said there, reported that 579 drones were launched into Ukrainian territory, but also a large amount of missiles, 32 cruise missiles and 8 ballistic missiles into Ukrainian territory. So another difficult day for the Ukrainian air defense. There were hits reported in 10 different regions. Kiev, the capital, of course, was struck as well, but as Dnipropetrovsk, Khmelnytsky and Mykolaiv were also among the places that were targeted overnight. And Lviv, close to the Polish border, also had activity above the skies. So again, you can see why Poland decided to scramble those jets to deal with the potential for an incoming threat across Ukrainian skies. Now, President Zelensky used the opportunity in response to these attacks to once again call for a combined European defense strategy to deal with these drone threats. Let's take a listen to part of that statement.
I want to thank our sky defenders today. There was another massive Russian strike. Almost 580 drones. A significant part of them are Shaheeds. Another 40 missiles. Many hits. Drone interceptors worked well today. Well done, mobile fire groups, aviation, our F-16s, our army aviation. Thank you all. Well done. Thank you for every drone and missile shot down. But there were still hits. Dnipro, Pavlohrad, other communities of the Dnipro region were among the Russian targets. We still need to strengthen our air defense system, and this depends largely on partners. And many have this power, the power that should protect life. It is worth using it. Everyone now sees the Russian incursion against Poland and yesterday against Estonia, and these are not accidental things. The Russians will try to continue to spread their aggression, their destabilization, their intervention. This is their system. We need to counteract this, and also systemically, all together.
Now, for their part, Kyiv also confirmed that it had conducted strikes on Russia targeting oil refineries again in that Ukrainian campaign against Russia's oil production infrastructure, with the Ukrainian General Staff reporting and confirming strikes in the Saratov and Samara regions of Russia, so quite far behind the front lines there, again using deep strikes to target Russian oil infrastructure. So tit for tat, but again, the Russian strikes are killing civilians here in Ukraine, and Ukraine is targeting specifically those Russian oil refineries, trying to degrade the revenue that they receive, that Kyiv feels is crucial to sustaining Russia's war effort here in Ukraine. Back to you, Don.
Right, that might be the best form of sanctions yet. Oz Chatterjee reporting from Kyiv. Keep yourself safe. Thank you for your report. Was it another hybrid attack on Europe? Airports and passengers were plunged into chaos on Saturday as a cyber attack on a provider of check-in and boarding systems from Berlin to Dublin delayed flights and left passengers stranded. At Brussels Airport, half of the flights scheduled for Sunday are canceled and will have to be rescheduled due to ongoing disruptions. While at London's Heathrow, at least 29 departures and arrivals have been canceled due to the attack. Randy Potts reports.
A cyber attack has thrown Europe's busiest travel hubs into chaos. Long queues at check-in desks early this morning, closed check-in counters. The culprit? A technical issue impacting a critical service provider, Collins Aerospace, a company responsible for check-in and boarding systems used by airlines worldwide. Brussels Airport confirmed the attack happened late Friday night, forcing them to resort to old-fashioned manual check-ins.
So what's happening is that one of our external service providers who provides us with a system for passenger check-in and boarding was hit by a cyber attack last night. This is impacting Brussels Airport and other European airports.
Many travelers are still grounded at the airport in Brussels.
Just came here and we saw at the board our flight is delayed, so we have no other information or nothing why it's delayed.
Much of Saturday, ticket counters at the Brussels, London, and Berlin airports are empty as many departures remained on hold. In Poland, airports have not been affected.
A cyber attack targeting European airports is currently under close observation. At present, there are no indications of a threat to Polish airports.
Cyber expert Jake Moore says the airline industry has no room for failure.
It seems that a third-party supplier in the aviation industry has been attacked, whether that is a deliberate attack or maybe a major failure. It has proven that this single point of failure ripples through airports around the world in a matter of moments.
While Collins Aerospace works to resolve the issue, the impact on flight schedules is immense, leading to widespread inconvenience for thousands. The question remains, if this is an attack, who is behind it, and how can we prevent the next security breach? For TVP World, Randy Potts.
First, it was Fitch who downgraded its outlook on Poland's debt. Now it's Moody's, which revised its credit outlook from stable to negative. However, Poland did maintain its long-term credit rating score of A2 with a low risk of default. Now, Kazimierz Wysiak explains how the conflict between the centrist government and the new conservative president is hurting Poland's debt credibility.
Poland's economy is growing by close to 3% annually, but the latest credit outlook change by Moody's is a warning sign for the government.
If the government is unable to address spending pressure and hurdles to raise revenue, it would denote weaker fiscal strength and policy effectiveness compared to our current assessment.
The agency says the main reason behind the change is the ongoing conflict between the centrist government led by Prime Minister Donald Tusk and the conservative president backed by the opposition Law and Justice Party.
Your veto, Mr. President, blocked a bill which included much more regulations than just social benefits.
I'm surprised now to see criticism from the government.
Karol Nawrocki has already vetoed more bills in the first month of his presidency than his predecessor Andrzej Duda in a year and a half. And that attitude doesn't make it easy for the government to lower Poland's record-high deficit.
The agency is telling it looks as if the outlook for Poland, for the fiscal policy, would be such that whatever the government would like to do to cut the budget deficit, the president will veto it, and therefore there will be no change in the dynamics of the increase of the debt.
The credit rating shows how much investors can trust Poland to pay off its debts. The lower the rating, the bigger the interest rates the country has to pay when borrowing money. The credit outlook, on the other hand, is more of a yellow card, and it can have tangible consequences.
The message is the following. The risk has increased somehow and is likely to increase in the future. So if I were you, I would demand higher interest rate for this for the bonds if the government wants you to buy its bonds.
Poland's government deficit for 2026 could be as high as 64 billion euros. This is partly caused by its robust defense spending at close to 5% of its gross domestic product, the highest percentage in all of NATO.
If you've got some expenditures growing, then either you should, if you want to keep the deficit under control, you should increase the revenue, or to cut the other spending.
And that hasn't happened. The change of the outlook by Moody's therefore means that Poland could have its credit rating cut in the future. For now, it enjoys its comfortable A2 score and a steady growth of GDP. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Wysiak.
The Czech Republic faces a change of course away from tight budgets and pro-Ukraine stance in general elections in just 2 weeks. Former Prime Minister and billionaire Andrej Babiš seeks a political comeback, riding a wave of discontent. Alexandra Bulenda reports from Prague.
The frontrunner of the forthcoming parliamentary elections in the Czech Republic, former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, is locked in the battle with Prime Minister Petr Fiala. Babiš is trying to tap into a frustration over high living costs by promising tax cuts and less aid to Ukraine. Now, nearly half of Czechs, 49%, say their country is already giving too much to Kyiv. Babiš has promised to cap the retirement age at 65, cut corporate taxes and reduce the value of added tax on restaurants. He also wants the state to buy out ČEZ, the country's energy giant, which would give his current government full control over electricity pricing.
So if he wants to limit the retirement age, he will need to find money to do that. I think we had the limit of borrowing. We already paying significant amounts of money for public debt. He will need to choose. Either he will keep the promise of not raising taxes too much, or he can keep the promise of limiting the retirement age, but he cannot do both.
Beyond promises, ANO thrives over voter loyalty. According to research firm STEM, the party enjoys support from nearly all groups, especially people over 60 and those without a high school diploma. Crucially, support for ANO doesn't fall sharply in any demographic.
And we have to recall that the electoral victory of the current government was really close, and really the smallest shares of percentage points were in play when they got to power in 2021. So what we can see now is like the return of the pattern and like the general dissatisfaction, which is, I would say, quite common at the end of the electoral term.
That dissatisfaction has also given oxygen to anti-establishment groupings. Some of them are openly anti-Ukraine, anti-EU and sympathetic to Russia, competing for protest voters with simple message about corruption, elites and national sovereignty.
This election is really about how people see the system that's been in place since 1989. Parties like ANO, SPD or Stachilo, I believe it should be completely replaced. The governing bloc, ODS, the Pirates and others, argue that it just needs fixing, not a full reset. That's the fundamental divide.
So as the Czech Republic heads into the fall campaign, the stakes are clear. Economic promises, populist appeal and an old argument about the system itself. For some, it is about paying less for electricity and pensions, but for others, it is about whether Prague still stands firmly with Kyiv. History shows that populism thrives in hard times, and in the Czech Republic, it may soon shape the country's future. From Prague for TVP World, I'm Alexandra Bulenda.
The Polish city of Wrocław is transforming its walls into vast, futuristic art gallery. More than 80 artists from 20 countries are taking part in this year's Kino Mural festival, of course. The theme, the Odyssey. Our reporter Karolina Shapland has more.
For 2 nights only, the walls of Wrocław old apartment blocks are alive with moving images. A striking open-air festival of the world's leading contemporary audiovisual artists.
One striking installation, The Swarm, has been created by the New York-based new media artist Yoshi Sodorka.
Oh, it's beautiful. Like, it's just a nice, calm town, and I really like that. And it's like people are really friendly, and I do appreciate that the people like this type of experimental video art, like watching those stuff outside, and it's amazing. Yeah.
Since its launch in 2019, Kino Mural has been the brainchild of 2 Polish filmmakers, the Bartos brothers. We spoke to the co-organizer Bartek Bartos about this year's theme, the Odyssey.
The Kino Mural is like a 2.5-hour film screening, but we are giving you, to the audience, like each wall is sometimes like a scene, or maybe there is more scene in one walls. So our viewers are deciding, what kind of films they will receive, so they are an authors.
The event now draws huge crowds eager to see art break out of galleries and spill into the streets.
The vibe is amazing. People here are very interesting, and yeah, I think it's very great atmosphere here.
Which was your favorite installation?
For me, it was this one. It really showed that creative, artistic value and views, and it was just really amazing to be here and to see how many artistic minds can come together and create something as just amazing as this.
This modern art, this scene and this climate is amazing. And that was really nice meeting in Wrocław. Wrocław is a really cool, nice city.
For many, this is contemporary art at its finest. It's visually stunning, it's bold in its use of AI and modern technologies, and most importantly, it's free for all to admire. For TVP World, I'm Karolina Shapland.
Russia continues to test European and NATO's resolve. On Friday, 3 MiG-31s violated Estonian airspace, causing the country to call for NATO Article 4 consultations. This, of course, comes on the heels of the Russian drone incursion into Poland's airspace earlier this month, prompting the first use of NATO fire to down the drones and also prompting Article 4 consultations. So how much more is NATO willing to take before using decisive force to deter Russian aggression? Now, joining me to discuss is national security and foreign policy expert Mark Toth. Good evening, Mark. Great to see you, and thanks for joining us on World News Tonight.
Great. Thank you, Don. Great to see you.
Yes. Now, Mark, I read your latest piece in The Hill with John Sweet. Now, you two highlighted the partnership between Russia and China shifting from an ideological struggle against the Western-dominated world to one that is entering a more overt phase with these latest airspace violations in Poland, Romania, and since yesterday, Estonia. So where is this new global order headed, and what does that mean for the transatlantic alliance?
Yeah, Don, what we've long argued is that the world's been in this ideological third world war. It doesn't look like what Hollywood said it would look like. It's been more a death by 1,000 cuts. But those cuts are getting costlier now, as we've just seen both in Poland, where you had 19, some people have argued even 50 drones that was incurred in your airspace in September 9th. And then you had the flyovers in Estonia of the MiGs, and then the drones that also were in Romania. And so all of these things are coming together, and it's troubling. I mean, basically what we've argued is there's two competing continuums right now. One of these continuums is what was started by Trump by meeting with Putin in Alaska. Putin, whether Trump intended this to be or not, has taken that meeting as a green light to continue his attack on Ukraine, to try and to get NATO to stand down. We've seen that with the drone attacks, the flyovers, et cetera. And he's touting that they've got 700,000 troops on the ground fighting Ukraine. The hybrid warfare, just like you were reporting at the top of the hour, that's happening, most likely that cyber attack on the airport facility. All of those things are just green-lighting him. Well, at the same time, to circle back to the core of your question, you've got China that's also basically saying, look, we have ideas to replace the Atlantic Charter as it once was conceived by Churchill and Roosevelt in 1941 when they met off the coast of Newfoundland. And they're doing that with something that's called the Global Initiative that dropped when they had people together for their 80th celebration of the end of World War II, where they really want to see the Global South replace that order. So kind of what we're seeing right now, what's happening in Poland and in Estonia and in Romania, and obviously Ukraine as well, is this conflict coming into close contact with each other. Your region now is kind of the ground zero of these competing global orders.
It is, and I'd say it's probably high time for the transatlantic alliance to be stronger than ever. But I think that's a little bit too premature at this moment. Now, after this latest incident in Estonia, in which Russian MiGs were in Allied airspace for 12 minutes with transponders switched off and no contact with air traffic control, is the NATO response by reacting actually deterring Russia, or is it inviting more such incidents?
Don, my own personal interpretation is that these are going to invite more unless NATO gets tough. They need to send a clear signal that if there are any more incursions of Russian drones or Russian fighter jets, such as this one, that just happened in Estonia, there were 3 of them, that potentially were carrying nuclear weapons. Look, they were equipped with Kinzels, and Kinzels can carry nuclear weapons. You could have had Tallinn, or Tallinn as some people call it, a city of 450, 500,000 people gone in a second. So these are the equivalent of acts of war, and NATO has to stand firm and say we're not going to put up with it anymore. The next time, whether it's a plane or whether it's a drone, it gets shot down. We've not seen that yet, and that's disappointing. It needs to happen.
It reminds me back in 2015 when Russia violated Turkey's airspace for just 11 seconds, a Turkish F-16 shot down a Russian Su-24. Now, earlier today we heard Petr Pavel, the Czech president, say that the next time a Russian aircraft violates NATO airspace, it needs to be shot down. As we saw back in 2015, there was no reaction. There was no war between Turkey and Russia. Is this do you think that this is the next response of NATO to prevent it from just being walked over by Russia?
Right. We can't ignore, Don, it's a great question. We can't ignore that a powder keg is building here that could explode. But I think it's only going to explode if NATO allows us to go unchecked. If NATO takes a firm stand right away and does what the Czech president was saying and basically shoot these things down if they cross into NATO airspace, I think that prevents that powder keg from happening, and that needs to happen. I'd go a step further. These are only happening because Putin thinks he has a green light. Obviously, my country needs to do more. Trump needs to push back against that. His statements to date haven't been sufficient in doing so. He's still sending green signals, whether he gets it or not, to Putin to keep doing more of the same. But I think NATO member states individually, a coalition of the willing, if you will, can do more. In these recent discussions, as an example, between Ukraine and Poland about doing a no-fly zone over Western Ukraine would help protect not only Ukraine, but obviously these drones especially from entering Polish airspace, Romanian airspace. And then obviously the same protections need to be presented and afforded to the Baltic states after seeing what happened to Estonia.
Absolutely, Mark. We've been arguing this for over a year now. Finally, it looks like it's on the table, which is encouraging. But I'd like to move on. George Barros from the Institute for the Study of War, good friend of TVP World, well, he's called the Russian incursion into Poland's airspace by drones earlier in the month. He's called it an act of war. Do you agree with that assessment? Is it an act of war? And maybe Article 5 should have been invoked instead of these Article 4 consultations?
Look, George Barrow is a great guy. The Institute for Study of War is unparalleled in terms of their analysis of what's happening with the war in Ukraine. I do think it gets technical when you start bringing up these words like act of war. They have legal meaning in terms of international law. But I'll go as far as to say, look, I think George is right in the spirit of it. They certainly have the appearances of the act of war. And I think it's important that NATO respond accordingly to say, we're not going to take a chance. We're not going to let a NATO member state get attacked. And we're going to be diligent in shooting these things down. In terms of whether Article 4 or Article 5, I think Article 4 at this point is sufficient. It calls for consultations. Remember, for Article 5 to get triggered, it's got to be a material breach. I think we're getting there, but a material breach means that it's got to be dangerous in scope and scale. And as we saw back in 2015 with the shooting down that you referenced of the MiG-24 by the Turkish F-16, that wasn't deemed a material breach yet. But I think if you look at the totality of what Russia is doing in Estonia and Poland and Romania and in Ukraine, we're getting awfully close to that. And I think what Russia needs to understand is that Article 4 could quickly get escalated into an Article 5 type situation. So I think George is headed in the right direction, and he's certainly right to wave that flag, and Putin needs to hear that message.
Yeah, and it's the second Article 4 in just a couple weeks. Now turning the subject a little bit, I'd like to focus now on the recent sanctions that Ukraine has introduced on the Russian oil industry by attacking their refineries, knocking out their capacity to supply the international market and their own domestic market. Is this the best way to hit the Russian war machine? And when do you think that it's going to make a very visible impact on the war effort?
Yeah, Don, great question. Look, Ukraine is doing the best it can on the battlefields right now with the array of equipment, weapon systems, and ammo that they've got. But that's a static war for the most part. They are able to do counteroffensives. Zelensky just announced one as well. But they've got to find ways to fight Russia asymmetrically and more traditional ways of going after their oil and energy structure. They've done a masterful job at that. The latest estimates, and again, these are a little bit dated now, is that 17 to 18% of Russia's oil infrastructure has been affected. And if you take that out of the equation, that not only affects their war machine on the ground, causing them to have to prioritize oil and energy resources to them. It also affects their economy as a whole, creating domestic pressures, but also strain on their armaments supply chain in terms of continuing to feed this war. So Ukraine is doing that masterfully. And frankly, if Europe wants to find another way, in addition to this no-fly zone, helping Ukraine do more of those kind of attacks, giving them equipment like Taurus, et cetera, and the green lights to go ahead and use it as deep into Russia as they can. That's all good ways to make Russia pay a greater cost and change Putin's own personal cost about whether he should continue this war or finally end it.
Indeed. Well, we'll have to see exactly where this takes us. Mark Toth, U.S. national security and foreign policy analyst, thank you so much. It was great to have you once again here on World News Tonight. Thank you.
Always a pleasure, Don. Good night.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you for joining us and have a great evening. We'll see you next time. Good night.